Good afternoon. I'm waiting for a moment or two, make sure that we get on to the cycle that YouTube is on. Okay, my name is George Paris. I'm an old chemist. I got my bachelor's degree in 1969, PhD in 1974, and then I've taught undergraduate chemistry classes, general and organic, throughout the 2000s, up until about 2015 roughly. And so I've seen a fair amount of stuff in laboratories. And suddenly, for some reason, I've suddenly decided I need to do a video on lab safety. I guess, maybe my conscience is hurting me and getting back to me or something. But thought I would mention, because a lot of people today are not doing a lot of hands-on chemistry. You have a lot of PhD chemists who are actually spectroscopists or molecular biologists or somebody who is not doing a lot of hands-on, fairly large-scale syntheses and whatnot with exciting compounds. And so for those few of you who are actually doing that type of chemistry these days, I thought I would alert you that it is potentially dangerous, and there are some things to look out for. And it actually goes all the way back to my high school days. When I was in high school, I graduated from high school in 1965. And I guess it was probably been about 64, 63. I took chemistry in high school. We in high school we made we made oxygen by heating up mercuric oxide, and of course you get mercury left over, and that was cool because all the kids got to take the mercury home and play with it. Something which today people just go nuts over. It will not kill you immediately, folks. It's probably not good for you, but it's not going to kill you immediately, which is, I don't think a lot of chemists understand that. A lot of the general public doesn't understand it. But we literally took blobs of mercury home, gave me to your little brother, and lost them on the floor and all that kind of stuff. We also made nitrous oxide. I'm not quite sure how or why we did that. But all the students were allowed to sniff the nitrous oxide, and a whole bunch of these guys basically got high on nitrous oxide in the chemistry lab, and they were like going wild. The teacher had to take the girls out of the chemistry lab. So the guys were just in there saying and doing things that teenage boys, 15, 16, 17-year-olds would do. And I recall that one kid threw a glass slide to another kid and cut his hand. So that was exciting. But so anyway, that got me through high school. But I'd love to do a principles of problems story here. I don't really have time to do that. Maybe I should do that some other time. One of the major issues I think most people don't appreciate in chemistry, and they really should, it's not that inobvious, is that as you scale a process up, the ability to dissipate heat is roughly proportional to the surface area of whatever it is. In other words, it increases as r squared, where that is the radius squared. If we think about a sphere here, round bottom flask. So if you, at the same time, the amount of heat generated is directly proportional to the volume, which goes up as r cubed. So a lot of things which are not particularly of concern at small scale, and a lot of today, because of analytical techniques and whatnot, people are working at small scale a lot, which is fine, it's great. No waste, no danger, etc., no toxicity, and minimal cost for raw materials. Anyway, so if you're working at a small scale, you lose the heat very quickly, and it doesn't become a big issue. But if you scale things up, suddenly now you're getting to a range where the heat that is generated by the reaction is not going to be immediately dissipated through the walls of the reactor. So that needs to be taken into consideration when you start scaling things up. And in my experience, when I was in college and high school and graduate school, we tended to work on about a few hundred mils, 500 ml round bottom flask was not an unusual reaction container. 250 was a little on the smaller side. 100 was like you had a really small reaction to do. You could go up to a liter. I think I've done reactions in like 3-liter round bottom flask, which getting a good size scale, like a mole or two of material. So in any event, I thought I would go through some experiences I had so that maybe you will know some of the problems that you could get into if you got into this. I left out of high school. I went to NC State University, majoring in chemistry. This was 65 through 69 type frame. And this was in the old Withers Hall. I don't know if all you NC State grads out there may know where Withers Hall is, but it was an old building from the 1930s, I guess, 20s, 30s. In any event, and I was working for Dr. G.G. Long and his colleagues, and we were doing arsenic, antimony, bismuth type chemistry for the most part. And when on a different video, I talked about getting the job working as an assistant to Dr. Long, which was wonderful. I did that for the whole 4 years I was there, and beyond actually. And one of the first things he had me do was make trimethylstabine. It turns out Long, and I believe Doak and Friedman or somebody else, had just published a inorganic synthesis paper on how to do this, like on a mole scale. So anyway, you take antimony trichloride in ether, and you add that to a Grignard reagent in ether, diethyl ether, and you make trimethylstabine. Then the process was to distill this off of we did this on about a bowl scale. I think had at least a 1 liter, maybe 2 liter, 3 liter round bottom flask here. You swapped around the various fixtures, and instead of having an addition funnel and a overhead stirring, paddle stirring, we switched out to a straight distillation head to a flask that was designed to recover the ether and the trimethylstabine. And you can actually, using a heating mat, you can actually heat this up, and the trimethylstabine boils relatively low and would transfer over, and you'd end up with an ether solution of trimethylstabine. In any event, that all worked fine. It took some time and went through that process. When I was left over, I had this overhead stirring system and a big lump of magnesium salts with there was some residual ether in there. You couldn't get all the ether, so it was really pretty sort of tarry almost. Okay, and this was sitting in a hood it was in the same lab as the big NMR, and Dr. Moreland, who was not a hands-on dirty type chemist, he was a spectroscopist, was in there. And they said, okay, you add water to this lump and just basically wash it out, neutralize it, wash it out. Not knowing much about the solvation energy of magnesium chloride, I started adding water to this thing, and I think there was residual ether in there, and there was a tremendous amount of heat given away when the water displaced the ether from the magnesium salts. And the ether boiled and came up out of this with whatever else was in it, and sort of splattered the hood. Dr. Moreland starts running around, kill it, kill it, kill it. And I said, I think I just did. And I got a little splattered on me in the various places, but to no obvious effect. And so that was one of the first exciting things that happened to me as a undergraduate student at NC State. However, and that was almost funny. It was surprising. It was potentially dangerous. It was almost funny. We took that trimethylstabine, by the way, and chlorinated it. We did a lot of chlorinations and worked with big cylinders of chlorine gas, which will come in. My experiences there will factor into something that happened to me later. And so it was not an environment in which it was a lot of stuff that could go wrong. Fortunately for me, I learned my lesson very quick. It's like, be careful. Now, I'd like to talk about two other separate issues, maybe three, that occurred in that building while I was there, and this was as an undergraduate, 65 to 69, and they were not necessarily fun. As I was saying, I was working as a lab assistant, part-time during the year and full-time during the summer. And I wasn't the only one. Dr. Long hired a couple of other guys who were a little bit different motivated, but in any event, this one kid, who was a couple years younger than me, we had keys to the laboratory, and the buildings were open 24/7. No big issues. So anyway, this kid who was living on campus, I lived off campus, he came in one night with a friend to show him what he was doing in the lab. Now we had a lot of stuff. We had the thing I'm going to focus on here, we had a shelf with a bunch of solvent bottles on it. And one of the things sitting up there is like a 1 gallon wide mouth pickle jar full of kerosene and a pound of sodium. It was a billet of sodium about, I don't know, 6 or 8 inches long and about 3 or 4 inches in diameter, a pound of sodium. And we would periodically take some of that, cut off a piece, use it for something. Anyway, it was sitting there, and if you're familiar with kerosene at all, it sort of gets slimy. It was, I guess it was mineral oil, more as kerosene, mineral oil, whatever. And so this kid with his friend came in there in the evening, and I guess he was going to show his friend this pound of sodium. So he reaches up, grabs this pickle jar, and it's slippery, and it dropped out of his hand, and directly below it was a water bath. And so the pickle jar falls in the water bath, breaks, got sodium, kerosene, and water. Okay, I came in the next day. I don't know whatever happened, how that all played out. I didn't get involved with it. I come in the next day and open the door of the lab, and it's like a black body. There was no light that escaped from that lab because everything was covered with soot. The windows were soot, the lighting was soot, the walls were soot, everything. It was like total darkness in there. Any light that went in never came out. And what had happened, of course, there was a fire. The hydrocarbon solvent, which I think was mainly kerosene, toluene, stuff like that, had burned. A lot of soot filled everything. And the kid that had been involved with it spent the next semester basically washing glassware for free. So I'm sure he learned a lesson from that. Thank God he was not set on fire, blown up, or whatever. And apparently his friend probably just ran out of the room. I don't know what happened. I have no clue as to what the events were there. But basically, this was an accident which you could sort of see coming. You've got sodium, slippery bottle, water bath. Maybe we shouldn't store things like that. Okay. All right. So the next episode actually happened to a new graduate student, and he, I think, had made pentaphenyl bismuth in ether again, and he did it on a large scale. He had like a 3 or 4 liter filter flask that he'd filtered everything through and into. He had all this ether left over, and probably, I'm thinking 2-3 liters of ether. And he's trying to boil that off through a water, what do you call it? Siphon. It's not siphon. It's Bernoulli principle. Suck the gas out. He put a big stopper in the top of this thing. We're talking a stopper that big in the top of this round bottom flask. Not round. It was a conical flask, filter flask, and he had it sitting on a hot plate with a stir bar in the bottom. And if you've ever evaporated in the ether, like a rotary evaporator, it gets cold. I mean, the ether evaporates and it gets cold. So the guy got tired of watching this thing get so cold, and so he turned on the hot plate and he left. All right, so the aspirator, that's the word I was trying to find. As you get older, you have trouble finding the word sometimes. The aspirator works well, pulls a good vacuum, but it doesn't have much capacity. So what was happening was the hot bath, the heat from the hot plate was heating up the ether. Ether pressure was going up. Well, the aspirator was sucking all it could, but it wasn't sucking near what was being produced. As I understand the story, and I wasn't there when it happened, the guy walks into the lab. Just as he walks into the lab, the pressure inside this conical flask got to the point it popped the stopper out the top. And the stopper went flying, hit the ceiling, and then a column of ether vapor followed it up and settled back down on the hot plate, and then it flashed from bottom to the top. All right. That was the description I received, probably secondhand, and it made perfect sense. And I came in the next morning, and I'm wondering why there's a big pile of foam at the door to the laboratory. I mean, literally, it's like a foot of foam in front of the door to the laboratory. And got into the laboratory, and there was this big burn spot over there. And foam. It was not as much soot as the other one, but there was foam on the floor and whatnot. Fortunately, I think this must have all happened during the regular sessions, because I don't recall being in the lab every day after that. So anyway, but that was another exciting experience where, you know, the guy turned on the heat on ether and walked away. That was a gigantic, stupid thing to do. Like I said, first-year graduate students, not the brightest ever. Okay, so that got me personally through my undergraduate period. However, when I was a senior, up on the third floor of Withers Hall, we had a physical chemistry lab, or yeah, I guess it was a physical chemistry lab up there. And someone had decided they needed another graduate student space, so they had put a wall of concrete blocks had been established across one end of this lab. It was about 10 feet to the windows, so you had a room about 10 feet wide between the real wall and this concrete block wall. There was a hood in there, and there was a graduate student space in there. I don't know who this guy was or what he was doing. But here, again, we're in the room, and there was this rumbling sound. I'm like, what's going on? So it turns out what had happened was the guy was making diazomethane. And it was a small reaction. He had, 100 ml round bottom flask apparently with this stuff in it. And it sat in the hood, but it somehow or other fell out of the hood and fell on the floor and blew up. Well, the explosion was not big enough to really personally do a lot of damage, but it did cause a big pressure increase in the room. It didn't blow out the windows, but it sort of shredded the Venetian blinds that it was being pushed out the windows, and the pressure was big enough to push this wall over. So this concrete block wall fell over and fell down, and it fell on the CHN analyzer that they just bought. They were very proud of their CHN analyzer. They'd sat in there, and one of the other new graduate students was working with that, and I guess she lost her job. But so again, nobody was hurt, thank God. There was some material damage, but these things happened. Well, like I said, I was directly or indirectly involved after the fact with 3 of them. I got personally involved with 1. So you had to be careful. By the way, in those days, these were considered safety glasses. You didn't need anything else. We know nobody ever wore gloves. We had a big pot of sulfuric acid, 100% sulfuric acid, and potassium dichromate that we used to take everything off of everything. And I would actually quickly pull things out of it and wash it off. See, you could stick your hand in here and get out if you just washed it off very quick. Timing is everything. Now, I have a statement I make to students when I do. I'm going to tell you a story. The last thing I'm going to tell you, probably if I have time, is going to be a case where I've got it, and I use this example when I gave safety lectures to my undergraduates when I was teaching. So anyway, move on from NC State to Georgia Tech. I went to Georgia Tech. How I got to Georgia Tech is a subject of another video. But when I got to Georgia Tech, I went to this research group, Dr. Gene Ashby's group, that made metal hydrides and greenage reagents and whatnot, organoaluminum reagents, and they were doing that type of chemistry. I had a very nice guy, love him. He's passed away now, died of cancer, smoker. Worked for Terry Milliken. His name was Bob Arnott, or Arnaud. And Bob briefed me when I first got there. He said, "You know how to fight fires of metals that are on fire?" And it's like magnesium fires and things like that. Oh, okay. You use sand. They had buckets of sand sitting around for putting out these types of fires because they were working with metal hydrides. And they were apparently still looking for a guy's finger. One of the previous graduate students who had just passed through the group had an explosion in a dry box that had taken his finger off, and they never found the finger. I guess it was just smithereens. And it was sort of almost like a joke within the group. Hey, look at the guy's finger. But in any event, what apparently happened there, the way you make, I think it was sodium hydride or potassium hydride, they do it in a bomb. Hydrogen gas, molten potassium, heat it up, and you get potassium hydride. Interesting. So this had apparently been transferred into a round bottom flask, which was not very well stoppered, and was sitting in this dry box that nobody used for a long time. And the guy got in there with a scraper and started pecking around at that, and it blew up. And apparently the theory is, and this is pure theory, nobody ever has any data on this, was that the potassium hydride, there was excess potassium metal, and the excess potassium metal reacted with oxygen to make superoxide, potassium superoxide, commingled with potassium hydride, and all you had to do was scratch those two together. Suddenly you had a very big reaction. I was not there for that one, but that happened before I got there. But that was an interesting story that people were telling. While I was there, I personally we were actually pretty good. I mean, we didn't have any big reactions or problems for most of the time I was there. I was out in the military from 70 to 72, so I was gone for about almost 2 years, not physically there, but apparently nobody had any great disaster. And while I was gone, they moved the lab to the new chemistry building that was over on Hemp Hill Drive. Anyway, so the original one was right beside Grant Field, and they moved over there to over across what was that? Hemp Hill Drive, Hemp Hill Road. I think they're still over there. I'm not sure. In any event, this is now we're talking 1972 time frame. The worst thing that happened to me while I was there was for some reason I wanted an NMR spectrum of trimethyl aluminum. So I'd put some in an NMR tube and took it down, did my NMR, came back, and I had, it's like half a mil of trimethyl aluminum in this NMR tube. And I'm thinking, we did this all the time. We had sodium metal went down the sink and stuff. We had little fires and stuff. I'm thinking, how bad a deal can this be? So I just took this NMR tube, took the cap off, flipped it, and trimethyl aluminum came out as an arc of flame and went into the sink. There's always acetone sitting around the sink, so some of that caught on fire. And there was a real bang when it hit the sink, bang. And I'm thinking, I was really impressed by that. That was a half a mil of trimethyl aluminum, arc of fire, bang, when it hit the water. Pretty exciting. That was really the stupidest thing I did while I was here. Now, we all ate in the lab. It's not unusual to eat in the lab in those days. In fact, into the 1980s, people were eating in the lab and not wearing gloves and all that kind of stuff. And this was safety glasses. So anyway, we went from there. I did my research over several periods of time. Papers are published, chem abstracts, you can find them. Some of them are in PubMed. In any event, so uh, I was in the process of writing my thesis. I was almost leaving. At that time, I was married, I had a 1-year-old child. And for some reason, I was out walking around the campus with my son, my 1-year-old son, in a backpack on my back. This is 74. This is probably like September 74. And apparently, a brand new graduate student had come into the group. And apparently, nobody told him anything. And he didn't know much of anything at that time. Poor guy. I came into the new chemistry building, third floor, I think is where we were. Walking down the hall, and there's water, there's soot, and there's blood on the floor. And I've got my son in my backpack. Never bring a child into a chemistry lab. There's no reason to do it. Don't ever do it. Okay. Because what is a burn on you would be his whole body. I mean, you could burn your hand or arm, and that would be the kid's whole body. It's like, you don't even think about that. Anyway, so this young man, who I never met him, uh, had, I, I understand he was doing reaction with potassium metal and hexachlorocyclopentadiene. I think he was trying to make a pentachlorocyclopentadiene anion. And I don't know, I have no idea why he was doing that, where he was going with that. And it was apparently being done in THF, which was another problem because THF is hard to get dry. And if you put THF and potassium metal together, you're going to get heat and hydrogen given off if it's wet. So I don't know what triggered the explosion, but this guy had a substantial explosion and fire in a lab, not my lab, somebody else's lab. And I never even seen the guy. I know that Gene Ashby was very upset. He'd gone and seen the guy in the hospital, and Ashby was, I thought he was upset, and other people said he'd been even more upset because apparently this guy was seriously burned. And I don't, like I say, there was blood, water, and soot on the floor in the hall and in the lab. Fortunately for me, I was on my way out. I didn't have to deal with that. I just filed my thesis and left. And I went on a postdoc up at NIST in Gaithersburg, Maryland, where I'm at, broadcasting from today. So, years later, literally I was working for the Food and Drug Administration about 1980, 79, 80. And I was down there for some conference or something. I dropped by by Georgia Tech and walked into the lab and actually met this guy. Never met him before. Met him. He had a scraggly beard over what appeared to be scars on his face. And he had like canvas sleeves on his arms that hooked around his thumbs, both of them. And he was there doing chemistry, and I guess he got a PhD eventually. I don't feel sorry for the guy, but he paid a serious price for that. And it was probably because nobody told him anything and nobody ever saw what he's doing. He apparently was doing this on a much larger scale than he needed to. You know, when you first do something, if you've never done it before, nobody else around you has ever done it before, do it on a small scale. He should have had a mil of this stuff or a gram of this stuff and 50 mils of stuff, but I think he was doing it like on 500 gram scale or something. It was at least a 500 mil round bottom, maybe 1,000, I don't know. But he was doing it on a much larger scale than he should have, not knowing what was going to happen and not having no clue what was going on. It goes back to my remarks at the beginning of this video about scale of reactions. All right, so got out of Georgia Tech. I went to EPA. I went to NIST. I had a little exciting thing that happened in NIST. I was replumbing a dry box up there. I was there for 2 years on a NRC postdoc. NIST, at that time it's called Bureau of Standards. It was in Gaithersburg, Maryland. If you've ever been up there, it's a big campus, nice rooms. I was in the Inorganic Materials Division and working with a guy named Fred Brinkman. Tom Coyle was the division director. and doing some organometallic stuff. Actually, I was doing arsenic chemistry and antimony chemistry because it was a environmentally oriented thing. So anyway, so I get, and those papers are also published if you're interested. So I was, one of my tasks was to replumb the dry box. They didn't have a decent dry box. They had actually got a fancy dry box, but it was, nobody used it, and it was not in good shape. So I'm there trying to figure out how it works. I had no instructions, no diagrams or anything, just had this dry box. And it was all like a black box with a bunch of knobs on it. And I am trying to figure out how to make this thing work. And one thing I wanted to do, I wanted to put a cold trap in there. I wanted to catch, solvent vapors that went through there. I wanted to take them out. So I had a great glass shop at NIST, created some really big cold finger traps, had a big door surrounding it, and I thought I had figured the thing out, and I was trying to pressurize the dry box with nitrogen. So I had high pressure nitrogen over here. So I turned on the nitrogen a little bit, and usually the gloves inflate. They got gloves that they inflate. When they're sticking out like that, you know you've got your pressure in your dry box. That's how you can tell it. So I turn a little bit on, and it's like gloves didn't go up. What's going on? A little bit more. Maybe is there a leak someplace? Where's this going? So I did this 2 or 3 times, and I should have known better. And because I didn't know how the plumbing worked, and the plumbing didn't work, basically. The plumbing was turned off over here someplace. And the first thing I knew was a boom. I had put 50 or 60 psi of nitrogen gas into that cold finger condenser and blew up the door and the whole works. Turns out Brinkman was on the phone to somebody in Pittsburgh, and they heard the explosion in Pittsburgh because he was on the phone and got over there. Fortunately, I didn't get hurt. I mean, had stepped away. I was trying to figure out what's going on with the knobs over here and that thing. But that was a fault on my part. The last thing I did before I left NIST was to put a pressure relief valve into that circuit so that couldn't happen again. I didn't have a pressure relief valve. Anyway, so I went to EPA, was at EPA for a while, got tired of the politics, went to FDA, and was working this is 300 C Street, went from 401 M Street, which was where EPA was, Waterside Mall, to 300 C Street, which sets to Southwest Washington D.C. You could throw a rock from there and hit the Rayburn office building. You could almost hit the Capitol from there. But they've moved out to White Oak, Maryland at this point, someplace north of D.C. In any event, so I'm in there, and this is the one that's on me. This was totally my stupidity, and I should have known better. Absolutely should have known better. I was trying to I got to the point I wanted to. I wanted adducts of DNA and adducts of xenobiotic adducts of these things. Theory of carcinogenicity that's very popular at the time. This was 1980, 79, 80-ish time frame. And it turned out, in order to do that, you had to methylate everything, turn the amino acids into methyl esters, and then you could do chromatography on them. I needed methyl. I needed a hydrochloric acid solution of methanol, no water. So I found a little tube, a little lecture bottle of hydrochloric acid. That's what it said on it. I had no idea what the mass was in there. Didn't know that there was anything in there. Wasn't sure about anything. And found that, but I could not find any fittings to go with it, little brass fittings. I knew it would take months to get things requisitioned, so I went into the hood and I carefully arranged glassware with tie-gun tubing and glassware, stupid, to this thing. And I didn't have a fitting, but I just plugged the tie-gun tubing on there, and I think I may have wired it on or whatnot, thinking that this will, how this is a little bitty cylinder about a liter total volume. I've been working with chlorine cylinders of much bigger volume and whatnot. So I'm thinking, how big a deal can this be? I should have looked up the vapor pressure of HCl gas at ambient temperature. I think it's like 40 atmospheres or something. I had no idea there was that much. Chlorine gas is actually high molecular weight and actually has a much lower vapor pressure in those conditions. So anyway, I'm thinking, well, I can, I'm just going to crack this valve a little bit. I'm in the hood's on, all that good stuff. I'm just going to crack this valve a little bit, take it very easy, and it will come out, go through a trap, and then bubble into my methanol, and I can make a methanol solution of hydrochloric acid. Remember, my hand was on the valve, and I was expecting to let this out very loose. I cracked that valve, and everything, poof, it all blew apart. All the glassware blew apart. All those little connections I'd made disappeared. And this hydrochloric acid is going, okay, immediately, my entire face, I'm like into the dry box. My entire face, eyes, mouth, I could feel it in my lungs. Hydrochloric acid gas. This is where knowing where the safety equipment in the lab is important. Now remember, my hand was on the valve. I did not have the presence of mind to turn it off. That tells you an idea of how excited I was. I have jumped out of airplanes. I've rappelled into deep caves. I've done other stuff that I considered to be fairly stressful. I did not have the presence of mind to turn this valve off. I went immediately to the shower. We have a safety shower. Stood out in the hall. Literally, this is outside the hall in the corridor of this building. Pulled the safety shower, and fortunately it worked. And I'm getting showered with water. Completely dressed, showered with water. And I just kept going there. I'm looking over there. That little cylinder continued to blow HCl gas for about 15 minutes. My colleagues saw what was happening, closed the sash on the hood, and it all vented out this roof of the building very near the Capitol of the United States. So that actually was used as an argument to get them out of D.C., but that was another story. In any event, so while I'm there showering, they tell you to wash for 15 minutes and stuff, and it was several minutes before I felt like everything was okay. Some guy comes up wearing a three-piece suit, and he says, "There's water dripping on my desk." And I said, have a great day. I'm here deconning. The point I make to my students when I've done lab safety briefings is that when something like that happens, you do not have minutes to make up your mind about what to do. You don't need to, you can't sit around and think about what to do. You need to know in advance what to do. You need to know where the safety equipment is. You need to know where the escapes are, etc., like that. But you do have seconds. Remember me sticking my hand in the sulfuric acid and pulling out the stuff and whatnot. Okay. You don't have minutes, but you do have seconds. And what you do in those seconds determine whether or not you go home on Metro, which is what I did, or whether you go to the hospital or worse. All right. So that is the lecture I give to most of my students when they go through this drill. Now, I'm going to carry this on a bit. In real life, you don't always get to do what you want to do. I wanted to be an academic researcher. I noticed a bee by nose on a tree the other day. I think I was cutting grass and ran a branch. In any event, you don't get to do what you want to do. You end up doing something else. I ended up in the environmental business. Like I said, I was at EPA and FDA and whatnot. And I ended up supervising field work and doing investigations, which involved geologists, hydrologists, biologists, ecologists, wetlands people, all kinds of soil people. And we did a lot of drilling. We drilled holes everywhere. I mean, drilled wells and installed wells. And I learned quite a bit from watching these guys. One of the things that was very important from the standpoint of working with drillers, we were usually the prime contractor supervising drillers. We would contract drillers and make them come on and do the drilling. But we were there. Our geologists had to take samples, and our chemists had to take samples of the stuff coming up out of holes. And we were out at Fort Riley. We drilled private property all around Maryland, and then I got a job out in Fort Riley, Kansas. So we were out at Fort Riley, Kansas, and working with some drillers out there. Really good guys. I would always bring, when we had a project starting, we'd usually mobilize from Maryland and from Rhode Island to Kansas to do this work. And we'd go out there for a week or two, and I'd always have a organizational briefing and safety thing and buy everybody dinner and stuff like that before we got started. And I would always brief them on safety. And my policy was we would sacrifice profit for safety. Okay, if we had to give up profit on the job to be safe, we would. Okay. We'd offer to give up profit for quality. If we needed to do something twice, we did it twice. And we did that several times. So anyway, and that my company supported me in that process. We made money. We actually did very well. Anyway, so one of the things to working with the drillers, their big concern was, the first big concern was the drill goes down and doesn't stop unless you stop it. And there's something, they all have cutoff switches. They have kill switches. And so one of the things I made my geologist and my chemist who were in the field too, and me too, we would go and we'd sit with the geologist and we would say, okay, where's the kill switch? Whatever piece of equipment you brought today, where's the kill switch? We want to know how to turn this thing off. Because you can get wrapped around that. You can actually get beaten to death by being dragged and drowned around the drill bit. So that was one typical thing we did. And we never really had any trouble with that. I was forced by some people we mainly did hollow stem auger drilling. But for some reason, these guys wanted to do cable tool drilling. I don't know, they thought it gave a better cross section or something. And so we had this very small outfit out there with a cable tool. It was a Bucyrus Erie cable tool drill set. If you're not into that, you have no clue what I'm talking about. Anyway, so these guys, these were idiots. These were first-class idiots. The drill got stuck, and you try to, the pipe went, like I said, try to pull it out. And so these guys, the front of this truck, it's this old truck, it's a 1940s type truck. Front of the truck is up. These guys are jumping up on the front of the truck trying to hold it down. It's like, you people are done. You know, we ended that fairly quickly. It's like, if you can't get it out, you're not going to do that while I'm sitting there watching what you're doing. Okay. So we had our episodes. But the one thing that we did, I personally almost did at there, you always need to know where all the utilities are. There's something called check miss utility. If you're going to cut holes in the ground, you're supposed to call miss utility. Miss utility comes out, tells you where the on-site, the off-site, they don't necessarily tell you where the on-site stuff, they tell you where the off-site utilities are, wires, pipes, etc. And so nobody told us that there was a cable, optical cable that ran around this airport, Marshall Army Airfield. We were at the east end of Marshall Army Airfield. And I had a very good guy named Peter Lee who started his own business. He's got a multi-million-dollar business now. He was a geologist, young guy, and he could do, we were going to do a seismic survey. For some reason or other, we wanted to know where the bedrock was underneath the airfield. And so Peter laid out a series of points. We needed, and he created out of pipe. You can buy pipe fittings and whatnot. and buy blank shotgun shells, and you put the blank shotgun shell, screw it down, drop it, and have a firing mechanism, and you do the seismic little explosions here. And we had, in order to do that, we had to drill holes. We had a drill hooked to something that looked like a rotor tiller, and I'm out there drilling these holes where Peter had laid off little markers to drill them in. We drilled a hole within a foot of this optical cable, which would have shut down the airport. And we set off on a shotgun shell there, and we didn't realize it. It's like after the fact. It's like somebody said, "Oh, there's a cable." What? We went and checked where the cable was, and we drilled a hole within a foot of where this cable was and set off a shotgun shell in it, and did a seismic survey of this area, and didn't ever know that until after the fact. It was like, that was a bullet we missed. So those are the types of things that can happen to you. So all kinds of stuff can happen to you after you get your PhD in chemistry or your bachelor's degree, whatever it is. I've been out in boats, could have drowned out there, things like that. You know, I just want to let all of you people know, that especially those of you who are now working with a few micrograms of something in a bottom of a melting point capillary tube or something like that, that if you scale that up, you could have some real problems. All right. So that's really all I've got pretty much for today. There are some examples of people blowing themselves up with various gas mixtures. If you're working with gas mixtures, you need to know what the flammability limits are, and you need to know what the, you know, if you can actually sit down and do calculations on how much reaction you can get, how much gas pressure you can get, and if that's going to blow stuff up. But risk assessment and risk analysis and hazard analysis has been something I've been interested in pretty much all my life, at least since my graduate career. And I would recommend, I've written a couple of papers, one having to do with the risk assessment of carcinogens, and one having to do with what's a reasonable risk criteria for carcinogens. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. We're coming up on 50 minutes, and hopefully I turned on this thing and we actually have recorded a video. Thank you for your time. Have a great day, and I'll try to get back to you with something else maybe more interesting in the future.